Hello and welcome to Skynet Today's Let's Talk AI podcast, where you can hear from AI researchers about what's actually going on with AI and what's just clickbait headlines. This is our latest Last Week in AI episode, in which you get a quick digest of last week's AI news, as well as a bit of discussion between two AI researchers as to what we think about this news. To start things off, we'll hand it off to Daniel Bashir to summarize what happened in AI last week. We'll be back in just a few minutes to dive deeper into these stories and give our takes.
Hello, this is Daniel Bashir here with our weekly news summary. This week, we'll discuss the EU's recent AI laws, a Tesla crash, a new algorithm for evaluating drug combinations, and AI's use in the COVID vaccine rollout. On Friday, April 16th, a group of European lawmakers called for the EU to ban AI systems that detect or label people according to gender or sexuality, saying the technology could be abused. As Reuters reports, the draft rules announced by the EU include rights safeguards and curbs on facial recognition, but not this specific provision. Alexandra Geese, who drafted an open letter signed by 33 others, said the potential harm of these applications outweighs their benefits, that there is no need for technology to make decisions about who is male, female, straight, gay, or otherwise. The EU Commission presented its draft rules on April 21st, which included curbs on technologies for hiring and policing. On April 18th, 2 men died after a fiery crash in a Tesla Model S. As The Verge reports, the car was driving at a high speed and failed to make a turn, driving into a tree. Neither of the 2 men were actually driving the car, and it's unclear whether the car had its autopilot system activated. While there have been at least 23 autopilot-related crashes under investigation by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, this appears to be the first fatal one where no one was in the driver's seat. Tesla has cautioned drivers that its autopilot system is not an autonomous driving system, although CEO Elon Musk has rejected calls to add better safety monitoring. According to Fierce Biotech, Facebook AI and a German research center built an open-source model to predict how effective particular drug combinations and dosages can be in treating complex diseases. The compositional perturbation autoencoder, or CPA, solves a difficult problem. The number of possibilities for such drug combinations and dosages can accelerate into the billions. The model predicts how the drugs interact with one another and how they might work together to attack specific cell types and interrupt diseases. Facebook claims this is the first single AI model to predict the effects of drug combinations and dosages, but several other AI developers, such as Notable Labs, have produced similar models. Finally, as millions across the world have started receiving their COVID-19 vaccines, some health experts have said AI will be integral for both the process of creating boosters for COVID variants and distribution of the vaccine. As Tech Republic writes, an AI system could aid distribution by understanding which populations to target to curb the pandemic sooner, adjusting supply chain and distribution logistics to ensure the most people get vaccinated in as little time as possible, and tracking adverse reactions. Matthew Putnam, CEO of Nanotronics, added that an AI system could help to build actionable datasets that allow doctors to examine root causes and other things researchers don't have time to spend on. That's all for this week's news roundup. Stay tuned for a more in-depth discussion of recent events.
Thanks, Daniel, and welcome back, listeners. Now that you've had a summary of last week's news, feel free to stick around for a more laid-back discussion about this news by 2 AI researchers. I'm Dr. Sharon Zhou, a graduating fourth-year PhD student in the machine learning group working with Andrew Ng. I do research on generative models and applying machine learning to medicine and climate. And with me is my co-host.
I am Andrei Krenkov, a third-year PhD student and hopefully soon enough doctor. Currently at the Stanford Vision and Learning Lab, I focus on learning algorithms for robotic manipulation and reinforcement learning. And let's just go ahead and dive straight in, as we do usually, into our news stories. First up, we have these stories from Business Insider and also Finance at yahoo.com, which are all about this Einstein Chatbot that has voice thanks to an audio cloning startup. So there's this company called Algorithmic that, in collaboration with some other people, has created this digital version of Albert Einstein that has a synthesized voice that sounds like, a famous scientist. And you can also talk to, a version that looks like him with more of a just traditional computer graphics rendering of him, which is pretty high resolution. And that's courtesy of another company, Unique, that is also hosting the interactive chatbot. So you can actually go to this URL, einstein.digitalhumans.com, and have some fun talking to this chatbot. So there's kind of the summary. I tried it for a bit, and it was neat, but also nothing too surprising, I suppose, given where the technology has been. It seems like the chatbot technology itself was not that advanced. It was a bit more scripted, but, definitely a cute application and I guess a good demo for these companies. What do you think about this, Sharon?
Yes, I think it's a nice kind of splash like you're suggesting here, but it definitely isn't new. It's hooking up together these APIs to make it work. But it is a cool little demo that is being shown here. And I think what's interesting is that this algorithmic company is kind of all about hooking together these APIs, and UniQ or something has been working on creating these digital avatars or digital humans, and that you can have this chatbot-like conversation with. And so it is interesting to see these kind of show up on the fold, and yeah, it's cool to see one from New Zealand as well.
Yeah, for sure. I looked it up just out of curiosity, and this company, Algorithmic, looks like has gotten some funding, 1.3 million for this AI-driven personalized audio as a service. So their whole thing is you provide text, and then they use AI to generate audio samples with this kind of voice cloning, what they call ethical voice cloning. And they also do audio mastering and other sort of audio as a service stuff. So, kind of a cute demo and another case, I think, of a demonstration of AI being commercialized and being applied to actually useful things. So I think we've seen a lot of different applications. We've discussed a lot about visual deepfakes and different models and so on, and it's neat to see something in the audio space, which I don't think we've discussed as much.
Right. And still on the speech and audio space, but onto a serious topic. Our next article is titled "Can Medical Alexas Make Us Healthier?" from the New York Times. And so this is a big push by Amazon as well as other big tech companies like Google and Microsoft to basically use voice recognition programs to identify signs of illness and disease. So basically being able to hear or listen to, what's going on with you medically, and then be able to take that to the next level and make you feel better, or be able to help you navigate this healthcare system, which we know is very expensive in America and often, unfortunately, ineffective at the same time. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Yeah. As I was just saying, it's cool to see more signs of where AI is being applied, and this is another example. I think for me, one of the more exciting examples, in the sense that here AI is actually making an impact in the real world, an impact in people's lives. It's not just some sort of consumerism or media, but it's actually part of healthcare. And this one is interesting. This article, I think, was prompted by Microsoft acquiring this company Nuance for $20 billion. So obviously this market is clearly big. And this, I think, the idea here is, as noted in the title, is this is kind of a Siri-esque system for taking notes for doctors and making requests. And it seems like it also helps clinicians, capture patient records, integrate them into electronic health records, and also combine it into rich Teams chat app for telehealth appointments. So, quite technical, certainly deep into the weeds of this market. But yeah, I think another kind of developing area in AI, maturing sector, something that over the next decade we'll probably just see everywhere, it seems like, which is exciting.
I'm optimistic to see it, actually. I heard someone who did a trial with one of Amazon's kind of Uber for health type things, and they completed care within 15 minutes of wanting care, which is crazy. So they got a nurse and a doctor to drive to them as the nurse was video conferencing her, and then had a chat with the doctor for 5 minutes and got the right medication and felt better. I was like, that is insane. And that, I hope, is the future. I mean, it's heavily subsidized now, but I think I can imagine that being the future. And regarding this currently, Nuance has been a very old company. I think 1992 is when it was started, and it's already a public company. And so the fact that Microsoft is acquiring it now means probably that they really want to develop this forward, because that's a very mature technology, or at least one that Nuance has been working on for a really long time. I remember even before, when speech was good at all in neural networks or anything, Nuance was there. And being the leader of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And certainly this is an industry where I think AI is needed, in the sense that, especially in the United States, we know that healthcare is a nightmare. Things take too long, things cost too much, there's inefficiencies, there's bureaucracy. So it's a huge challenge to really improve the system, but technology, I think, will have a part to play. We've discussed in the past also other efforts, such as using actual robots to do the jobs or do some of the work that nurses do, take care of some of the less interesting work of just carrying stuff, delivering things. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see all these efforts, and kind of interesting how quickly they can get integrated and hopefully improve things. And onto another, I think, exciting application of AI that's a bit different. Here we have this article from actually the Duke, the university, about how AI pinpoints local pollution hotspots using satellite images. So it's all about how researchers at Duke University have developed a method that uses machine learning and satellite imagery and weather data to autonomously find hotspots of heavy air pollution, city block by city block. So before now, it says that researchers trying to measure the distribution of air pollutants throughout a city would either try to use a limited number of existing monitors or drive sensors around a city in vehicles. But of course, setting up sensor networks is time-consuming and costly, and driving a sensor around is kind of maybe not as informative. So at least according to this press release, being able to find local hotspots of air pollution in this way is hugely advantageous. So what is your impression of this, Sharon?
Yeah, it's very exciting. I think we can leverage satellite imagery for a lot of things like this, where we don't have sensors everywhere. It really speaks to, I think, a lot of research in the field intersecting AI and climate, which I've obviously worked on, but we've also done it for, thought about it for methane, for finding clean energy. So like solar, where to put solar PVs or where solar PVs are, as well as wind turbines. And here, I think it makes a lot of sense. And the technique, the algorithm specifically, is using weather data and also the satellite imagery together to figure out, what is Like, what are some of those differences between that information and the actual levels of the particular matter that they are looking for from the real sensors, and then being able to generalize more spatially? So I think it's exciting, and I hope this is used more and more since satellite imagery is becoming more and more ubiquitous.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's exciting to see also in this press release, it mentions that the team has improved their method and actually applied it in Delhi. And they're able to find hotspots and cool spots of pollution with a resolution of 300 meters. So it seems like this technique is certainly evolving. And as you said, in general, there's a lot of work on finding different pieces of information using satellite imagery. There's also a lot of work on using this sort of data for farming and for other applications. And it's another area where maybe it's less sexy and that less popularly discussed than something like deepfakes, but it's probably a high impact area to apply AI in, and somewhere where AI tools really do make a big difference.
And onto an article that is trying to power a lot of our AI tools. The next article is from IEEE Spectrum, titled Cerebrus's New Monster AI Chip Adds 1.4 Trillion Transistors. And so Cerebras Systems is known for building huge monster computer chips in basically a single computer chip, and really showcasing that to the world for deep learning specifically, so specifically for neural networks. And they had previously announced something that was quite spectacular at the time. It was a relatively small chip for how much it had. And I think now it's an even more ambitious project with adding 1.4 trillion transistors to this basically newest chip. What are your thoughts on this and kind of the hardware acceleration that we're seeing also in deep learning?
Yeah, I guess we're on a bit of a streak on discussing different aspects, kind of powering AI or applications of AI. This has definitely been an area that, as AI has gotten big and has been applied and deployed for many applications, it's gotten more and more important. So famously, Google has their TPUs, tensor processing units that are now pretty mature. They're deployed. They are being used everywhere. I think Facebook also has their own custom server as well for deep learning and other things. And Cerebruss has been at this problem for at least half a decade, I think, and they have a really powerful kind of approach to it in terms of making a fully custom chip specifically for neural networks that are just massively powerful, right, in terms of its transistor count. It is interesting, I think, with Cerebruss that so far I haven't heard too much about them actually being adopted by companies, at least compared to something like NVIDIA's DGX or the powerful computing from NVIDIA in particular. So yeah, I'll be curious to see this space and how common it'll be to utilize this sort of more custom technology that may be a bit harder to develop with, but might be better for deploying. And yeah, certainly it's interesting to see it being so impressive now, so developed.
I think if it can help with Bitcoin mining, it'll certainly be taken up. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I do think it will be taken up given there is a shortage of GPUs, right? So I can see it being adopted. Yeah, and it would be cool to see how they do in the market compared to everything that's out there now, because I do see a lot of companies working on their own hardware and trying to gain some independence from NVIDIA.
Yeah, and just to compare, I think the number of transistors is maybe a bit abstract. So to be more explicit, compared to NVIDIA's A100 GPU, that one has around 50 billion transistors, has around 7,000 cores, has 40 megabytes of on-chip memory. And this new chip, as we said, has 2.6 trillion transistors compared to 50 billion, has 850,000 cores compared to 7,000, and has 40 gigabytes of on-chip memory compared to 40 megabytes. So, really, really out there numbers, gigantic. So, yeah, pretty cool. And then actually this article also lists a few customers like the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which is integrated into the 8th most powerful supercomputer for fusion simulation and cognitive simulation. There's also a Pittsburgh Supercomputer Center and various kind of labs and parallel computing applications. So, yeah, exciting. And I guess we'll have to wait and see what their third chip will be like, considering how absurd it is already. I can't even imagine what we'll get next.
We're always looking at orders of magnitude larger, whether it be neural network parameters or transistors.
Yeah, and it's a lucky thing with, the speed of cores slowing down. GPUs came just in time, and these sort of chips came just in time to continue the exponential rise of computing via parallelization, which is pretty exciting. I think it was a little scary there for a little bit in terms of worrying that we might stop, ridiculously expanding how fast stuff is. And on to our last article about another area of AI in industry. We have this article from WSJ about Walmart is pulling plug on more robots. So this is about how Walmart is phasing out these automated pickup towers that were erected in more than 1,500 stores to dispense online orders. And according to this article, that's because there's more focus on curbside pickup that has become more popular during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also reflects a retreat from generally initiatives to use very visible automation, robots that are moving around stores. Which includes these 17-foot tall machines that are placed at the front of stores. So I guess not necessarily surprising. I think it's always been a bit questionable how useful robots in these sorts of retail locations were. We also heard last year that the company stopped using these IO roving inventory tracking robots made by Bosa Nova Robotics after finding that humans can do the same thing just as well. And I think we discussed that story. So interesting development there, I think. What do you think, Sharon?
Not a hugely surprising trend, unfortunately, for robots. I think a lot of these robots are just these huge things and operationally, expensive there, where humans are a little bit more adaptive, flexible, and also just cheaper for the long tail of tasks. And just to be clear, the pickup towers, I'm not sure if I think of them as robots, actually. If you take a picture of them, they just look like vending machines for online orders, which they are, and they just hold your items until you go collect them. So it's like a giant vending machine. So I hesitate to say that this is a robot, but it is some type of technology that they did showcase and use for a bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's more like, new technology that looks fancy and changes how things work in stores, which I guess, I don't know that things have changed too much in this space over years with technology. It does remind me, of course, of Amazon Go, this idea of...
I wanted it!
I know. That's such an exciting use of AI, and seems like something, everyone would want. But so far, I guess it hasn't quite expanded that much. Maybe over the next decade, it'll become much more commonplace.
I mean, that and this are a result also of COVID. You can't go inside. Amazon Go would have been an inside thing, and same with this. But maybe it'll be here in the coming years as COVID does peter out, hopefully, fingers crossed. And
yeah, exactly.
And with that, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Skynet Today's Let's Talk AI podcast. You can find the articles we discussed here today and subscribe to our weekly newsletter with similar ones at skynettoday.com.
Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast, and please don't forget to leave us a rating and a review if you like the show.
Be sure to tune in next week.